Today I want to create a function which will look through birthdays and find the next person who has a birthday. This could be used if you have a table for your employees, including their birthday, and you want to know when is the next birthday, which person is it, and how many days are there until that birthday. On the surface, this looks very simple for a human to do because you can just have a cell with the date. Then all you have to do is comb through the birthdays and say which are in the future, meaning you'd ignore the month, which we can do with formatting, to say that I only want to see the DD and MM part. And I can say, well, this one is in the future, this one is, and these two. And then it's a matter of finding the smallest one. This task has two problems. I first have to exclude any birthday that's in the past, because I only want those in the future. But all birthdays are in the past, so I need to get rid of the year portion first, and then exclude based on the day and month in order to find which birthdays are in the future. Secondly, after removing those values, I have to find the smallest value. And if I had Excel 365, that would be simple. I can simply use the filter function. To begin with, I want to create 3 helper columns, which won't be necessary in the full function, but they will help with visualizing the process. First, I want to translate the dates into a date format that ignores year, which I can do by saying 10,000 plus extract the month portion from the date and multiply that by 100, and then add the day portion from the date. And the reason why I want to add 10,000 is so that there will always be a 1 in the front. If I have something like the 5th of May, that 0505, the leading 0 would be removed because there's no number called 0505. Instead it would be 505, and that would be ugly to look at. So adding this plus 10,000 means that all of them will start with 1, and they'll retain any leading 0 that date might have. And then I multiply month by 100 to split them up. I then also have to do this for the date. So copying that function, I just have to change what it references. I can use the today function here, but then any formula that references this cell would be volatile, meaning it would recalculate every time, as I discussed in the indirect video. In this case, I think it would be fine because this isn't exactly a heavy calculation to do. The next helper column is then to say, well, is this value in the future? And since they now have the same format, I can just compare the two and remember to anchor to this date. And then copy that down, meaning I'm only interested in the trues because they're in the future. And then lastly, I can use a bit of a hack, which I have to do since I don't have access to the filter function. And I got this from ExcelJet, the webpage here, where it says how to do an XLOOKUP with multiple criteria. Because what I can do is true is mathematically the same as 1 and false is mathematically equal to 0, meaning if I divide this number by true, it will be the original number. If I divide a number by false, it becomes a division 0 error. And then I can remove the errors. So if it's true, nothing happens. If it's false, it becomes an error. But then I do need to have a way to handle errors, which fortunately the function will be able to. At this point, I can then simply do the minimum function, which is to say, well, I want to find the minimum of these values, except this will fail because the minimum function can't handle division 0 errors. So for illustration purposes, I'll say, okay, find the minimum, but only include the ones that are true. So this is what I want to get. Then you can do a match in order to find this value inside this column. Then that should be an exact match. And then you find the person using index. And then I can just change the date. And then because this function only looks at these 4 values, it will always spit out euro. Again, for illustration purposes, I want to just highlight them normally to get around the error. But of course, I want a function that can handle these division 0 errors, or alternatively, I want to do something other than dividing by 0. But right now, I just want it to work, and then I can show an alternative. So the function I want to use is called Aggregate, which I only learned of thanks to ExcelJet, and I wanted to solve this problem. Aggregate seems to be the OG array function. You can even see here it's related to Excel 2010. Which is why I want to repeat. If you have access to Excel 365, then you can solve this using the filter function, but I don't have access to that, so I need to find a cope method. And the function here takes a function number, which can be max and min and sum and so on, all of the aggregation functions, in other words, taking an array or many values and converting them into one. And then it has options, which can be to ignore errors, which is what I need. I can say I want to aggregate. And then I see my functions here, and I could use minimum, but I'm going to use my small function instead. And then I want my options to be to ignore errors, because with the way I'm doing my calculation here, my filter, I get division 0 errors, and I want to ignore those. And then my array is, I don't actually need these 3 columns. They were only for illustration purposes, so I can do this calculation inside of my function. So I want to do that, and then before I forget, I need to remember that k is 1 in this case, because I want the number 1 smallest value. And then afterwards I can see if min would also work, which is just 5 instead of 15. So my array is that I want to do a calculation, the one I did in the D column, which was 10,000, plus extract the month portion of the array, plus the day function of the array. And then I need to remember to multiply by 100. And then I want to divide that by the second column, which I can also do inside of the function. And that should not be a semicolon, be a division. And this is where it becomes a bit hard to see what's going on because it's quite long. I need to say that if the output of this calculation is greater than the value here, then this will evaluate to true. And if not, it will evaluate to false. And again, it divides by either 1 or 0. And that is probably correct. And I can see here the problem is I'm referring to the wrong column. It shouldn't be D, it should be C. That was the whole point. The whole point is that the D column is unnecessary. Actually, all 3 of these are. So let's put a color on that. So 10, 4, 26 would be Denji here, which is probably true. That's what this calculation is saying. But unlike the minimum here, I don't have to exclude the division 0 error. So I just want to see if I could use minimum here instead. This will give me a value error, and that's why I wanted to do this with small. And if I step through the calculations using F9, this won't produce a problem, and I'll show another solution after this, which doesn't use the aggregate function. And you can see that first it's just doing the calculation I did in column D, and it's doing the division, and it's doing this true false that I did in E. Then it's just dividing these, and then we'll spit out the numbers, including a division 0 error. But here I have option 6, which says to ignore errors, and then it's still failing. So yeah. And that is why I use the small function, even though small and saying that I want k1 is functionally the same as the minimum function, but this doesn't give an error. And now I don't need this anymore, but I can repeat it. But then I do need to do that calculation, because now I'll imagine that these 3 columns don't exist. So I need to find this value and then convert this into the array in the D column. Here I want to use the same trick I got from ExcelJet, where if you divide by 1, you get the number back, and if you divide by 0, you get a division 0 error. So I can do a match where I say I'm not trying to find this value, because that needs to be calculated for every row. I can instead say I want to return 1. Then my lookup array is the calculation that I've done before, 10,000 plus 100 times month plus the day portion. I want to say if this is equal to the value here, then this calculation will then give me an array of 1s and 0. As I can see here, I have 1 true. So if I divide that by 1, I'll get 1 divided by 1 is 1, and 0 divided by 1 is 0, I guess. We can find that out real quick. Or actually, I need more parentheses. So this calculation divided by 1 in order to get rid of the true false, and then an exact match, and then probably a parentheses. And here it's going to give me an error because I can't actually find it, and this is what I'll show for the alternative solution to aggregate, and why I don't want to use it is that match is supposed to find the value inside this array, which we can already see here gives true in one case. Then I want to divide that array by 1, which we can see that Excel knows how to do, but it's not doing what I want to do, which is to do this calculation first and then do this calculation and then do a match on the whole thing. But if I do this and then do this, so I convert the array from these references and calculations and do the actual calculations, then it will work, but that's not what I want to do because this is now hard-coded. So if I delete everything and insert the original calculation, and if I hold down Control and Shift when I press Enter, I'll get these curly brackets around. So this is a CSE calculation, which is what you have to do an array function in the old Excel versions, like 2016. So this isn't something you have to do in Excel 365, but I do. And fortunately, I only have to hit Control-Shift-Enter once. If I go back in, it will delete them. So as long as I don't mess with this function, nothing will happen. So if I change the date here, actually, I guess this still needs to recalculate. And that's because this is no longer a proper function. And that's why you don't want to play around with this hard coding. So now everything is working properly and I don't have to mess with this cell, which is good because I would forget to hit Control-Shift-Enter here. So I can change this back again and both will update, and then I should just do the index. So this is the one solution using aggregate, which would be my preferred solution. You still need to do a Control-Shift-Enter equation in order to do the match, which is a bit annoying, but once you've done it once, you don't have to do it again. Alternatively, if you don't want to use aggregate, then you will still have to use these CSE functions, but you can use minimum directly. But like I showed, minimum is going to have a problem if you have a division 0 error or any other error, because the whole thing will error out, which is a bit annoying. You don't have the option to say to ignore errors. So what I can do is, if I borrow this function up here, because again, I only want the days to be included if they're in the future, but I can change this function to handle minimum instead. I still want to do the original calculation, which is converting the birthdays into the prefix version where it ignores year, and I still want to divide it. I need to still check if this is in the future, and if it is, now I have too many parentheses. So I'm saying if the birthday is in the future, as I did before, I'm still doing this birthday divided by 1 or 0, but this gives division 0 error, so I need to handle that. But if I just copy this, and if I just do the calculation, we'll get the division 0 error, but I can handle that by saying that instead of doing minimum on this calculation, I'm doing minimum on IFError. So if this thing, any cell inside this array is an error, as we know we have a division 0 error here, I can say that in the case of an error, I'm just going to output a very large number because I'm trying to find the minimum. And then I need to remember Control-Shift-Enter, and that will still output the same thing. So this, like with my match up here, I do need to remember to hit Control-Shift-Enter once I input it, and I have to manually handle errors. And this might be a little confusing, but you can use the end trick, which is where you input text, and then since text can be converted to a number, it will just be 0. So I can say input a large number because I want to find the smallest date. And then I forgot the Control-Shift-Enter because so that's two solutions, and I would definitely prefer aggregate because it has the option here to ignore errors. And also I don't have to remember to press Control-Shift-Enter. And if you have Excel 365, then please use the minimum and filter function. Then you don't have to handle this whole portion where you remove any date that's in the past because filter does that for you. But yeah,